right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on test execution and reporting. It's one of those things that's absolutely critical for building really solid, reliable software. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've sent over some really awesome material that covers like everything from actually running those tests to figuring out what the heck to do with results after they're done.
Right.
So our mission here is to really kind of dissect these processes, right? Pull out the really essential stuff so that you can quickly wrap your head around, how to guarantee you're delivering top-tier software. It's like a crash course in moving from those planned tests to actually having real, actionable insights about your software's quality.
Yeah, I like that. The sources you provided, they really do a nice job of offering a comprehensive overview. They don't just talk about the steps. They really dig into the why behind it all.
Okay, cool.
And it's really interesting to see how these tasks, which seem pretty procedural on the surface, actually have a massive impact on how reliable the final product ends up being.
Right, right. Yeah, it's kind of like that unsung hero sort of thing, right? Like, you don't really think about it, but it's super important.
Totally.
Okay, so let's just jump right in, huh? We'll start with executing those test cases. I mean, it sounds pretty simple, right? Just run the tests. But your sources are, like, super clear that there's this whole crucial setup phase that has to happen first. So what's the deal with that pre-execution stage? Why is getting that right so important?
Okay, so test execution, at its core, is about proving, right, validating that the software does what it's supposed to do under specific conditions.
Yeah.
But if those conditions aren't set up perfectly from the get-go, the results you get back can be, well, they could be totally misleading.
Right, yeah.
And that pre-execution phase is where we make sure that the test environment, the setup you're using to run the test, that it actually mirrors the real world environment where the software is going to live.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's making sure that all those prerequisites are in check. Things like having the right test data and making sure everything's configured exactly the way it needs to be.
Right.
It's kind of like, imagine if you were rehearsing a play on an empty stage with no props or costumes.
Yeah.
The performance would be totally different on opening night when you have all the real stuff, right? Same thing with software testing. We got to make sure we're testing in an environment that's as close to the real deal as possible, or we're going to miss important bugs.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And speaking of those prerequisites, can you kind of break down what needs to be in place before you even think about hitting that run button?
Sure. Think of it like baking a cake.
Okay.
You need to have all the ingredients measured out and the oven preheated, right?
Yeah.
Well, for software testing, it's kind of the same thing. You need to have the right test data ready to go. Things like valid usernames, maybe specific product details, inputs that test those edge cases. All of that needs to be prepped and ready.
Oh.
And then there's making sure that the software itself is configured properly for the test you're running. So all those dependencies, those integrations, they all have to be in place and working smoothly. It's only when all those pieces are set that you can be confident that the test results are going to accurately reflect how the software is actually going to behave in the wild.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've meticulously set up our little testing stage, right? And we've run our tests. Now we're at this critical point where we have to log the results. But it's more than just saying pass or fail, right? It's not that simple. So, how detailed do you have to get when you're logging those results?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. A simple pass or fail gives you the headline, like a really quick summary. But the gold, the real insights, are hidden in those details, especially when a test fails.
Okay.
It's like when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with your car. It's not enough to just know that it won't start, right?
Right.
You need to know if it's making a weird clicking sound or if any warning lights are flashing. Same with software. You got to capture not just whether it worked or not, but the details about any errors that popped up, the exact steps that led to the failure, and the exact environment where it happened. And thankfully, there's some really helpful tools out there.
Okay.
Things like JRA, which is a popular system for tracking issues, and TestRail, which is specifically designed for managing test cases. They're lifesavers for keeping all that information organized.
And I noticed that your sources were really emphasizing the importance of having that supporting evidence, like including a screenshot or a log file. So why is that stuff so critical?
Oh, it's huge. Those screenshots and log files, they're like your proof, They provide irrefutable evidence and crucial context. So if you have a screenshot of an error message, it eliminates any doubt about what the user actually saw on their screen. And system logs, those can reveal all sorts of underlying technical problems that you might not be able to see just by looking at the interface.
Mm-hmm.
And Even something as simple as a quick video capture of the steps that led to the failure can be super helpful for developers when they're trying to recreate the problem and figure out what's going on. This evidence transforms a subjective report, which is, just someone's interpretation, into a totally objective record of what happened.
Right.
And that can really speed up the whole debugging process.
I remember that login feature example from your sources. That was a good one. Just saying login failed is like totally useless. But if you include the exact error message that popped up, what browser version they were using, their operating system, all that, it gives the development team a crystal clear picture of what was happening when the failure occurred. And they can actually zero in on the cause way more effectively.
Exactly. Having all that detail allows the developers to essentially recreate the exact failure on their own computers, which is the first step to actually fixing the problem, right?
Right, yeah.
So now we've got all these individual test results, and they're super detailed, right? But how do we take all that granular information and transform it into something that the whole team and even stakeholders can understand and use? That's where test reporting comes in, right?
You got it. That's exactly it.
So how do you make sure that your test reports are truly insightful and valuable?
Test reporting is basically taking all those little bits of data we collected and turning it into a clear, concise summary. It's kind of like telling the story of how well the software is doing based on all the evidence we gathered during testing. And when it's done effectively, it helps everyone involved. We're talking product managers, developers, even those non-technical stakeholders understand where things stand with the application. And that lets them make smarter decisions, like, should we release this thing, or do we need to do more testing and fix some more stuff?
Okay, got it. So what are those must-have elements that should be in every test report to make it super useful for those stakeholders?
Your sources called out a few key things. First, you need a high-level overview of all the test cases that were run. Second, you got to break down how many tests passed and how many failed in a way that's easy to understand. And lastly, you need a summary of all the defects, all the bugs that were found during testing.
Right, makes sense.
And it really helps to use a consistent template or to lean on those reporting features that a lot of test management tools have built in. That way, you know that everyone's looking at the same information, presented in the same way, which just makes everything clearer.
Okay, yeah. So beyond just those raw numbers, right, what kind of metrics can you actually track that provide even deeper insights into the health of the software?
Well, there's test execution progress, which tells you how much of the planned testing is actually done. Then you've got the pass-fail rate, which we've talked about. That gives you a percentage of successful versus unsuccessful tests. And then there's defect density. That one looks at how many defects you found compared to the size and complexity of the software. It can give you a sense of the overall quality trend.
Okay, let's circle back to that pass-fail rate for a second.
Sure.
Say you've got 100 tests and 90 of them pass, well, 10 fail. A 90% pass rate sounds pretty decent, right?
Yeah.
But what are some of the, nuances you should be thinking about when you're interpreting that number? Because it's not always so straightforward.
That's such a good point, because even though 90% sounds pretty good, those 10 failed tests, those could actually be pointing to some major problems with the core functionality of the app. So imagine that all 10 of those failed tests have to do with users logging in, or maybe with a crucial transaction process. Suddenly, that 10% failure rate becomes way more worrisome than if they were just in some rarely used features.
Right.
So it's not just about the raw number. You got to consider where those failures are happening and how much they could potentially impact the user experience.
Got it. So the context is key.
Definitely.
And your sources also talked about different types of reports. Can you walk me through when you might use a daily progress report versus a test summary report?
Sure, yeah. A daily progress report is super handy for keeping the whole team in the loop on a day-to-day basis. It tells everyone how many tests were run that day, what the pass-fail rate was, and if there were any huge blockers that popped up. It's basically a snapshot of the testing progress for quick decisions and daily stand-up meetings.
Okay.
A test summary report, on the other hand, that's like your big picture overview. You typically put that together at the end of a testing cycle. It summarizes all the testing activity, lays out those overall pass-fail rates, gives you key defect metrics, and offers a more in-depth analysis of all the findings. It's the document that stakeholders would look at to get a sense of the software's quality right before you release it.
Okay, that makes sense. It's important to tailor the information to the audience, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so what happens after these reports are all shiny and ready? What's that critical next step to make all this testing effort actually worth it?
It's all about handling those test results and diving into some post-test analysis. It's not enough to just generate the reports. You have to really dig into what they're telling you, spot any patterns, and then plan what you're going to do next, especially when you find defects.
Okay, so what does that initial handling of test results look like in practice?
First, you do a thorough review of everything to make absolutely sure that all the tests that were planned were actually run and that the logs are all complete.
Mhm.
Then, for every failed test, it's crucial to revisit those detailed notes we talked about earlier. The steps to reproduce the issue, the exact error messages, the log files, all of that, to make sure everything is accurately recorded.
Right, and then comes the analysis part. What questions should you be asking when you're looking at a whole set of test results? What are you looking for?
Post-test analysis is all about finding trends and patterns in the data. So, are there a bunch of failures in a specific module of the application? Are certain types of defects popping up over and over again?
Hmm,
Finding those patterns can tell you a lot about potential weak spots in the code or areas where maybe the requirements weren't super clear.
got it. Your sources were also big on using defect tracking systems during this stage. How do those help with post-test analysis?
Those systems are basically your central hub for managing all the problems you find during testing.
Right.
And they let you link each defect back to the specific test that uncovered it so you can trace everything back.
Yeah.
This helps you understand how big of a deal each defect is and also makes it easier to track how fixes are progressing.
Right, right.
Plus, a lot of these systems have built-in reporting features that can help you spot trends in the types of defects you're seeing and where they're popping up.
Okay. So when you do find a defect, what needs to be in that defect report to make sure that the development team can actually use it to fix the problem?
That defect report has got to be clear, concise, and give the developers all the info they need to understand and fix the issue without wasting time. So that means a short summary of what the defect is, step-by-step instructions for how to reproduce it, a clear description of what the software is supposed to do versus what it's actually doing, and then an assessment of how important the defect is and how bad it is.
Okay.
Basically, the more information you give them up front, the faster they can get it fixed.
Got it. Imagine a situation where a critical test case for user authentication keeps failing over and over again. How does post-test analysis help you prioritize and tackle something like that?
In that case, seeing that crucial test fail repeatedly would immediately send up a red flag, right?
Yeah.
It'd be like, okay, this is a high priority defect. Post-test analysis would then involve going through the logs from those failed attempts and looking for any error messages or patterns they have in common. That deep dive into the logs might reveal something like a problem with the authentication service itself, or maybe a specific configuration issue in that module. And because we're talking about a critical function that's failing repeatedly, the post-test analysis helps us put that defect at the top of the to-do list for the developers.
Yeah.
They need to investigate and solve that right away, even before they tackle less critical bugs.
Absolutely. It takes that symptom, that failed test, and turns it into a potential diagnosis and a clear call to action.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into test execution and reporting, what would you say are some of the most important best practices for making this whole process as effective as possible?
Your sources were really clear about one of the most impactful practices: automation.
Oh, yeah.
If you can identify those repetitive tests that you're running all the time and automate them, you'll save a ton of time. And also ensure that the tests are always run the same way, which reduces the chance of human error sneaking in.
Definitely. Automation is like having a superpower when it comes to testing, especially for regression testing, where you got to make sure new changes haven't broken anything that was already working. What other best practices stand out to you?
Collaboration is huge. Having open and clear communication between testers, developers, and everyone else involved is absolutely essential. Everyone needs to know about the test results, understand what they mean, and work together to fix any problems that pop up.
Why is that open communication so vital, especially when it comes to test results?
Because those results aren't just for the testing team, right?
Right.
They provide valuable feedback to the developers about the quality of their code, they let product managers know about the stability of different features, and they give stakeholders a clear understanding of how the project is progressing and what risks might be lurking.
Okay.
Having open communication ensures that everyone has this information and can use it to make smart decisions.
Makes sense. And going back to the actual logging of tests, those sources you sent really hammered home the importance of having clear, detailed logs. So why is that so crucial in the long run?
Because those logs are often the first place people go when they're trying to figure out why a test failed, especially if the person who ran the test isn't the one trying to fix it.
Hmm.
Having logs that are clear and detailed gives everyone the context they need and the clues they need to reproduce the issue and figure out what's causing it, which saves a lot of time and frustration.
And lastly, the concept of always improving your testing processes. That seems like a really key takeaway. How do you make sure that your approach to test, execution, and reporting keeps getting better over time?
It's all about taking a step back and reviewing how you're doing things on a regular basis. Look at past test results, any feedback you've gotten, and try to find areas where you can improve. So let's say you keep seeing a ton of failures in a specific module. Maybe you need to tweak your test strategy for that area, add some more specific test cases, or even take a look at how the code is designed. It's an ongoing process of learning and adapting to make things better.
Yeah, it's treating your testing process as something you can analyze and optimize, just like you would with the code itself.
Exactly.
So to sum up our deep dive, it's clear that thorough test execution, comprehensive reporting, and that insightful post-test analysis, they're not just boxes to check off.
Right.
They're the foundation for delivering high-quality software and for making sure everyone on the development team is on the same page.
Absolutely. By really embracing those principles, you can go beyond just finding bugs and actually understand how healthy and stable your software is, which makes you way more confident about releasing it into the world.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. And for those listening, think about this. How could a more rigorous and thoughtful approach to test execution and reporting, based on everything we've discussed today and the sources you provided, not only prevent those immediate problems with your software, but also those sneaky issues that pop up way after you've launched, during maintenance and updates?
Yeah, great question.
It's definitely something to ponder.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on.